We all get caught up in Saitama's strength, but Murata has been telling a much deeper story that a lot of fan base and content creators in general tend to overlook. I am obviously one of these people, and I never really paid much attention to the level of detail that Murata does put in the story. However, in recent time, as I'm looking back and reading the manga all over again, I start to notice some of these very deep writings in the story of the One Punch Man universe. So in this video, we're going to peel back the surface, look past the punches, and talk about the real narrative that One and Murata is actually trying to build in these stories. One where Saitama isn't just strong or just a demonstration of physical strength, but rather a character that defies God and the biggest danger to God, and generally the mythological structure of the entire One Punch Man universe. Now, I'm obviously not a power scaler, I don't have a PhD in anime debates, I am a very casual fan. However, in recent time, I've definitely spent a lot of time looking into these characters a bit more so I can share my experience with you other casual fans. Let me explain why. Casually, I'm here for the fans who didn't grow up reading books, watching the lores, but still wants to appreciate the worlds that a lot of these very talented artists have created. To really understand the character of Saitama, you have to look at him at a much deeper level, not just as a hero, but as a character that can come off somewhat mythic. Think about the Prometheus of the One Punch Man universe. That's how I would describe Saitama as a character. The one who brings a gift directly to humanity that threatens God. The mysterious being that we were introduced to really earlier on in the One Punch Man universe. Earliest time of introduction of this character God was when we saw the Homeless Emperor. Greek mythology, Prometheus defied Zeus by giving human fire. The one gift that let humanity stand on its own instead of living in the fear of God. Saitama does the exact same thing, obviously very different in a metaphorical manner, but his fires isn't just strength or power, it's hope. The belief that you're allowed to be human, flawed, insecure, traumatized, and still choose to do good. See, the god of the One Punch Man universe is pretty much terrified of Saitama because his entire ecosystem as a being depends on people breaking down psychologically, people losing hope, people being afraid, people in despair, and surrendering their humanity so that he can control them. So pretty much he's a parasite in a way. Now, the god of the One Punch Man universe isn't the god in a normal sense or in a more biblical or Islamic sense. The god of the universe is less of a protector, he's more of a collector. He only appears when people are at like their absolute breaking point to collect, offering them power in exchange for despair, and turning their traumas into fuel for his existence. And this is really an important point, because this is really honestly one of my theories of how Saitama is going to collectively help defeat this character God. Because I genuinely don't believe that even as One Punch Man of a character as he is capable of one punching a god or growing beyond the power of a god. So I'm gonna offer a much different approach to how I think that theoretically they are going to defeat this character. Every time someone loses hope, their identity shatters, right? They find things absolutely meaningless. Between chapter 141 to 143, when Homeless Emperor was fighting Zombie Man, this is where we actually see some of the tactic that God uses to influence people. Homeless Emperor is a character, a very sad character actually, that a lot of people don't talk about, whose life fell apart into this sadistic view of humanity. He loses his job, his dignity, pretty much the whole purpose of him being alive to begin with in general, and more importantly, the world treats him like trash, and this causes him to spiral so deep into self-loathing that he began to question why he lives, which ultimately caused him to himself. That's when God appears, not as a comfort, not as a guide, not as a supporter, but as someone who agrees with the despair that Homeless Emperor is going through and offering him an alternative. So Homeless Emperor essentially gains power, but he becomes the perfect pawn for God, a man who no longer sees values in humanity, and therefore he had no reason to resist the divine influence of God. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. We never saw an interaction between Homeless Emperor and Saitama. I think this is probably one of the biggest factors as to why Homeless Emperor ended the way he did, because every time people encountered Saitama, it's always very meaningful, and it ended up being like a more hopeful way. So I definitely think that if Homeless Emperors actually encountered Saitama, I think this would have definitely changed a lot of things that happened. Take Garou, for example, a man who spiraled so deep into loneliness and rage that he became the perfect vessel for God's influence. Garou never truly accepted God's ideology. He rejected the whole idea of good and evil to begin with, but subconsciously he wanted more power to become the ultimate symbol of fear, and that craving opened a door for God to influence him. But when he meets Saitama, everything changes. And even though we got the really super cool fight and one of the best drawn fight that we've seen in anime history, Garou could never beat him physically, obviously. Their clash was never about the fist, it was a collision of two completely different worldviews. Once the flight slows down, Garou asks Saitama why he wasn't gonna kill him, and Saitama just says the simplest thing: he's a hero, and a dying kid asks him not to. That moment, the moment he hears the final request, sees Taro's body, and he finally understood that he's become the ominous future he feared so much. Saitama doesn't lecture him, he just talks to him like a person. That tiny moment of compassion is enough to break God's influence. And because Garou chooses humanity over divine power, God retracts the gift. Cosmic Garou's body crumble into salt. Straight out of the Bible, if you guys don't know the story of Lot and his wife, she kind of was given an instruction, and then she defiled God. She looked back and her body turned into a pillar of salt. And I think this is definitely a biblical reference, which again emphasizes how great of a writer Murata can be. And I think we kind of see more of this also with some other characters like Tatsumaki and Fubuki. I think that when it comes to Tatsumaki, she was one of those characters who almost was influenced by God. She wasn't really this like very stoic, psychic, lonely character anymore. And she also kind of sees Blast in him, and I feel like Blast can also be a representation of hope, seeing how the entire mystery behind his character is that he was going to eventually come back when there is a threat so big. So obviously he was like a hopeful character for all of humanity. So I think that direct reference to Blast and Saitama from Tatsumaki's perspective is a very clear indicator again that the character of Saitama isn't just a gag character based on power. It is a character that is built upon hope. Moving forward, I think the most recent example of the character of Saitama being a symbol of hope is the most recent chapter with Amai Mask. When we see like his monstrous forms when he was fighting that little clown character, we can see that the entire world rejects him. Like they absolutely were frying him. Like there was no ounce of humanity being directed towards him, and this eventually drives him closer and closer to despair. And honestly, he did despair. And I definitely think this was a perfect moment for God to show up, and I think for the most part, I was expecting that from the chapter. But right before that happens, we see Saitama shows up. Right in the middle of the breakdown, when Amai Mask is convinced that he's nothing but a monster, Saitama tells him something nobody else would: you are really cool. And honestly, if Saitama didn't walk in that moment, God absolutely would have. Amai Mask was isolated, he was ashamed, he felt rejected, the exact emotional spiral God used on Homeless Emperor, the same vulnerability Tatsumaki almost fell into, and the same despair that drowned Garou before Saitama pulled him back. But instead of becoming God's next puppet, Amai Mask got something divine beings can't offer: compassion, hope, and humanity. Amai Mask doesn't get redeemed, he pretty much gets restored by Saitama's character. Now, at the beginning of this video, I talked about how Saitama reminds me of Prometheus, and I'm going to explain why this is the case. Because this isn't new, we've seen this pattern over and over. Anyone who crosses path with Saitama chooses humanity over despair, and every time that happens, God loses another source of power. Because the more Saitama acts like a true hero, restoring people emotionally as much as physically, the weaker God becomes. At some point, God won't have apostles left to control, despair left to exploit, or broken hearts to invade, and that's when Saitama can finally fight him head on. And I think all of this started, if you guys remember, when Saitama was fighting Boros and he got launched to the moon and sent this crack to the moon. Back then, honestly, when I saw that personally, I thought it was really cool. I was like, yeah, this is such a cool, like, sequence and a big power scaling mindset that I had back then. I was like, oh man, this is such a cool feat for Saitama. But we now know that God's dimension is tied to that moon-like realm because they make a lot of references to the moon. I mean, there was one chapter where we saw God's literal spine. So that punch, it was the first crack into God's window. Pretty much Saitama literally dented the barrier between humanity and divinity before we even knew God existed. So Saitama is Prometheus. His gift to humanity isn't power, it's hope. And hope is the one thing God cannot control. Anyway, that's the entire video. Thank you very much for watching. If you're still here at the end, thank you. I really do appreciate that a lot. Here's a fun fact. Over 2.6 million videos are actually uploaded on YouTube every day, and you decided to click mine, and this is definitely something that I appreciate a lot. If you do enjoy the breakdown, please feel free to comment, subscribe to the channel, turn on the post notification, but only do that if you actually genuinely enjoy the video. Either way, thank you for your time, and I'm gonna see you guys in another video. Peace.